Hello, my friends. Have you ever used an iPhone? Listened to music on an iPod? Or maybe you love Pixar movies like Toy Story? Well, guess what? One man helped create all of these things. His name was Steve Jobs, and today, you're going to hear his amazing story. But before we begin, let me share some crazy facts about him. These will surprise you. Did you know that Steve Jobs was adopted? His real parents gave him away when he was a baby. But don't feel bad. His new parents gave him love, and they raised a genius. He dropped out of college after just 6 months. Sounds like a terrible idea, right? But actually, it helped him. He took a calligraphy class, just for fun. Years later, that helped him design beautiful fonts for Apple computers. Yes, the fonts on your phone exist because of that one class. He got fired from his own company. Imagine creating something huge and then being kicked out. But Steve Jobs didn't give up. He started a new company, bought Pixar, and made Toy Story. Later, Apple begged him to return, and he saved the company. His last words were a mystery. Oh wow. Oh wow. Oh wow. What do you think he saw in that moment? Let me know in the comments. Steve Jobs' life was full of ups and downs, but he never stopped. He changed the world. And in today's video, we will take you on an amazing journey through his life, from a small garage to creating one of the biggest companies in history. But wait, there's more. At the end of this video, I will help you improve your English with key vocabulary, learn new words from the story, key grammar points, understand English in a simple way. So, if you love inspiring stories and want to improve your English, stay with me. Now, let's begin the story of Steve Jobs, the man who dared to think differently. Early life and adoption. Our story begins with a remarkable man named Steve Jobs. Have you ever used an iPhone or listened to music on an iPod? Maybe you've even seen a Pixar movie like Toy Story. If you have, you know the incredible work of Steve Jobs. He wasn't just about inventing things. He made them beautiful and easy to use. Steve's life was a roller coaster of highs and lows. He started Apple in a garage, but later, he was kicked out. But he didn't give up. He came back and made Apple one of the biggest companies in the world. Steve had big ideas, a strong will, and he never stopped trying to make things better. This is the story of Steve Jobs, a man who changed how we live and work with technology. And in this first chapter, we'll explore his unique childhood. Childhood and interests. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. His parents were Joan Scheel and Abdul F. Jandali. Abdul F. Jandali was from Syria and came to America to study at a university in Wisconsin. There, he met Joan Scheel. Joanne's family owned a farm in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Joanne and Abdul F. fell in love, but Joanne's father didn't want them to be together. When Joanne found out she was pregnant, she decided to give the baby up for adoption. She wanted the baby to be raised by people who had gone to college. Joanne traveled to San Francisco to have the baby, but things didn't go as planned. The couple who were going to adopt the baby changed their minds when they found out it was a boy. So, the baby, who would later be called Steve Jobs, was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs. Paul Jobs was a mechanic, and Clara Jobs was a bookkeeper. They lived in California and were a hard-working, middle-class couple. Clara was of Armenian descent, and Paul was from Wisconsin. They met after World War II. Steve and Joan quickly fell in love. They had always wanted children but couldn't have them. So, they decided to adopt. Joan found out that her baby had been adopted by a couple who hadn't gone to college. She was upset and didn't want to sign the adoption papers. But Paul and Clara promised to pay for Steve's college education. Joan finally agreed. Steve knew from a young age that he was adopted. His parents were always honest with him about it. He remembered one day when he was a child telling a girl across the street that he was adopted. She asked if that meant his real parents didn't want him. This made Steve feel sad and he ran home crying. His parents told him that they had chosen him especially. They made him feel loved and special. Steve grew up in Silicon Valley, a place that was becoming famous for technology. His father showed him how to fix things and work with his hands. Steve wasn't very interested in fixing cars, but he liked electronics. He learned about electronics from his father and from books. He also met a friend named Steve Wozniak who also loved electronics in his neighborhood. Many of the fathers were engineers. They worked on things like radar and batteries. Steve was curious about these things. He asked questions and learned that he was smart, maybe even smarter than his parents. This made him feel different even though he was loved by his parents. He knew he was adopted. This, along with his intelligence, made him feel separate from the world. He was a child who was both abandoned and chosen. He was ordinary and special. This unique childhood helped shape him into the person he would become, a man who would change the world. Meeting Steve Wozniak and the blue box business. After high school, Steve had a friend named Steve Wozniak. Everyone called him Steve Wozniak. He was a genius with electronics. He loved building things, especially computers. He was very good at it. Steve and Steve Wozniak were very different people, but they became good friends because of their shared love of electronics. One day, while reading an interesting article in a magazine, Wozniak stumbled upon something called phone phreaking. It was about people who found clever ways to make free long-distance phone calls. These folks used special devices called blue boxes to trick the phone system. Wozniak was fascinated and decided to build his own blue box. He knew he had the skills and knowledge to do it. Steve was also excited about the idea, though he didn't know much about electronics. Together, they spent weeks designing and building the blue box. It was a complex device, but they finally finished it. They tested it out and were amazed. They could make free phone calls all over the world. They even tried calling the Vatican, pretending to be important people like Henry Kissinger. It was just a prank, but it was a lot of fun. Steve had a different idea, though. He thought, why just use this for fun? We could sell these blue boxes. Wozniak was surprised. He just wanted to share his creation with others, not make money. But Steve convinced him that they could start a business. So, they started making and selling blue boxes. Wozniak built them, and Steve found customers. They sold them for $150 each, and it was a successful business. They made a lot of money, but it was also illegal. One day, they had a scary experience. They were trying to sell a blue box to some guys at a pizza place when the guys pulled out a gun and stole it. Steven and Wozniak were scared and decided to stop selling them. Even though the blue box business was short-lived, it was important. It taught Steve and Wozniak how to work together. They learned that Wozniak was good at building things, and Steve was good at selling them. It also gave them the confidence to start something bigger. Wozniak was still working at Hewlett-Packard, HP, a big company that made electronics. He was designing computers in his free time and showed his designs to HP, but they weren't interested. They thought it was just a hobby. Wozniak was disappointed, but Steve saw the potential. The birth of Apple. Steve Jobs knew that Wozniak's computer designs were incredible. He had an idea. Let's start our own company and build these computers. Wozniak was hesitant. He loved his job at HP. It was safe and secure. But Steve was persuasive. He promised they'd have fun and change the world. Wozniak convinced him to leave HP and start a new company with him. They needed a name for their company. Steve had been working at an apple farm and liked the name Apple. It sounded simple and friendly. If they didn't have a better name by the next day, they'd call it Apple Computer. They didn't think of anything better, so they called it Apple Computer. They also needed some money to start the company. Wozniak sold his calculator, and Steve sold his Volkswagen van. They raised about $1,300. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started. In 1976, Apple Computer was born. It was a partnership between two friends, Steve Jobs, the visionary salesman, and Steve Wozniak, the brilliant engineer. They were an unlikely pair, but together they would change the world of computing. Their first product was the Apple I. It was a simple circuit board that allowed people to build their own computers. It was a small start, but it was the beginning of something big. It was the beginning of Apple. The Apple II and the rise of personal computing. A new age began after the first few Apple I computers were built and sold. Steve Jobs knew they could do even better. The Apple I was good for hobbyists who loved electronics and building things themselves. But Steve wanted to reach everyone. He wanted to make a computer that was easy to use, right out of the box. This meant creating something totally new. The Apple II was different from other computers at the time. It wasn't just a bunch of wires and parts. It had a case, a keyboard, and it could show color graphics on a television screen. This made it much more appealing to people who weren't tech experts. It looked friendly, not intimidating. The Apple II was the start of a new age, the age of the personal computer. Steve Jobs and his friend Steve Wozniak worked together to design the Apple II. Wozniak was a genius when it came to electronics. He was great at making circuits and writing software. Jobs, on the other hand, focused on how the computer looked and how easy it was to use. One of the most important things about the Apple II was its color graphics. Before this, most computers could only show black and white text. Wozniak found a clever way to use the computer's chips to create color images on a regular television screen. This made the Apple II much more fun and exciting to use. Another important thing was the Apple II's design. Jobs wanted it to look good in people's homes. He wanted it to be something that people would be proud to own. The Apple II had a plastic case that was clean and simple. It didn't look like a complicated machine. It looked like something that anyone could use. The Apple II wasn't just a better computer. It was also easier to sell. Jobs knew that to reach more people, they needed to sell the Apple in stores. He found a store owner named Paul Terrell who agreed to buy 50 Apple II computers. But he wanted them to be fully assembled, not just parts. This was a big challenge, but Jobs and Wozniak found a way to do it. The Apple II was a success. People were excited about having a computer in their homes. They used it for games, writing, and learning. Apple grew very quickly. Jobs and Wozniak became rich and famous. As Apple grew, Jobs realized he needed more help. He brought in Mike Mariella, an older and more experienced businessman, to help him manage the company. Mariella invested in Apple and became the chairman of the board. He helped Jobs to focus on the most important things and to make smart decisions. Another important person was Rod Holt. He helped Jobs to design the power supply for the Apple II. Holt was a very different kind of person than Jobs. He was a Marxist and smoked a lot of cigarettes, but he was also a very good engineer. Jobs knew that he could help Apple make a better computer. The Apple II was a huge hit. It was a great product, easy to use, and Steve Jobs had a vision that computers could change the world. He wanted to make computers for everyone, not just experts. The Apple II started the personal computer revolution, showing that computers could be more than just tools for businesses. They could be tools for creativity, learning, and communication. It made computers accessible to ordinary people, changing the way they lived and worked. The Apple II was a crucial step in Steve Jobs' journey. It showed he had the talent and vision to build a great company and was willing to take risks. The Apple II was just the beginning. There were many more challenges and successes to come, but it was the foundation on which Steve Jobs built his empire. It was the first big step in his quest to leave a mark on the universe. The Macintosh and a new vision. After the success of the Apple II, Steve Jobs had a new idea. He wanted to make a computer that was easy for everyone to use, not just tech-savvy folks. He imagined a computer like a friendly appliance, simple and beautiful. He wanted to make a computer that was insanely great to use. This led to the creation of the Macintosh. Jobs knew that the future of computers wasn't just about numbers and text. It was about pictures and icons, things that everyone could understand. He wanted to create a computer that was fun and easy to use, a computer that would change the world. Jobs had seen something special at Xerox PARC, a research center where scientists were working on new computer ideas. They had created a graphical user interface, or GUI, which meant that instead of typing, you could use a mouse and icons to interact with the computer. Jobs had some unique ideas. He thought it would be easier to use a mouse to click on pictures and menus. He was so excited about this idea that he gathered a team of talented people to work on the Macintosh. He wanted the best engineers, designers, and programmers to join him. He knew that to make something truly special, he needed a team that was as passionate and creative as he was. He found people who were willing to work hard, think differently, and push the limits of what was possible. However, Jobs could be very demanding. He had a strong vision and expected everyone to share it. He could be critical and harsh if he didn't think someone was doing their best. People on the Macintosh team called it his reality distortion field. This meant that Jobs had a way of convincing people that anything was possible, even if it seemed impossible. One member of the team, Andy Hertzfeld, explained it this way: reality is changeable. He can convince anyone of practically anything. It wears off when he's not around, but it makes it hard to have realistic schedules. Jobs' reality distortion field could be difficult to deal with. He could be stubborn and unwilling to listen to others, but it also helped him to inspire his team to do amazing things. He pushed them to create a computer that was not just functional, but also beautiful and easy to use. The Macintosh team worked tirelessly, often working long hours and weekends. Jobs was constantly pushing them to make it better, to make it perfect. He wanted every detail to be just right, from the design of the case to the way the mouse felt in your hand. He wanted the Macintosh to be more than just a computer. He wanted it to be a work of art. Finally, in 1984, the Macintosh was ready. Apple planned a big event to introduce the new computer to the world. They created a television commercial that was very different from anything that had been seen before. It was called 1984, and it showed a woman running towards a big screen with a hammer. The screen showed a man talking, and then a woman threw a hammer at it, breaking it. The commercial was a message that the Macintosh was going to break the rules and change how people thought about computers. The launch of the Macintosh was a success. People were excited about the new computer and its easy-to-use interface. The Macintosh wasn't just a machine. It was a tool for creativity and expression. It inspired people to think differently and see the world in a new way. The Macintosh was a big achievement for Steve Jobs. He had taken a risk, pushed his team to the limit, and created something truly remarkable. He had shown the world that computers could be more than just tools for business. They could be tools for everyone. However, the success of the Macintosh didn't solve all of Jobs' problems. His demanding personality and his desire for control would soon lead to conflicts with others at Apple. Before long, he would find himself facing a new challenge, getting fired from the company he had created. Fired from Apple. The year was 1984, and Apple was on top of the world. The Macintosh computer was new and exciting, and Steve Jobs was a star. But inside Apple, things were not so good. There was a big problem brewing between Steve Jobs and John Sculley. Remember John Sculley? He was the president of Pepsi that Steve Jobs had convinced to come to Apple as CEO. Jobs had asked him, "Do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to change the world?" Sculley chose to change the world, but now he and Jobs saw the world very differently. Sculley was a businessman. He focused on making money and running the company smoothly. Jobs was an artist. He cared most about making great products, even if it meant spending more money or taking risks. The two men started to disagree more and more. One of the biggest problems was the Macintosh. Jobs was very proud of the Mac, but it wasn't selling as well as he had hoped. Steve Jobs had some big ideas for Apple, like making a better Mac with more memory and a faster processor. But Jobs wasn't interested in what the engineers wanted. He was already thinking about the next big thing and was difficult to work with. He could be charming and persuasive, but he could also be mean and critical. He had a way of making people feel uncomfortable, and he would tell them their ideas were stupid or that they were idiots. This created a lot of stress and tension at Apple. One of the original investors in Apple, Mike Mariella, brought Sculley into the company to manage Jobs. Mariella thought Jobs was too young and inexperienced to run the company, but he hoped Sculley could keep Jobs under control. However, Sculley found it hard to control Jobs. Jobs was very stubborn and didn't like being told what to do. The situation got worse in 1985 when Apple's sales were down and the company was losing money. Sculley decided that something had to be done. He talked to the board of directors, and they agreed that Jobs had to be removed from his position as head of the Macintosh division. The news was a shock to Jobs. He had created Apple, and now he was being fired from his own company. He felt betrayed and angry. He couldn't believe that Sculley, the man he had brought to Apple, was now turning against him. Sculley told Jobs that he could still be involved in the company, but in a different role. He wanted Jobs to focus on new product development and come up with the next big idea. But Jobs didn't want to be a product visionary. He wanted to be in charge. The two men argued for weeks, and finally, Sculley went to the board of directors and told them that he could no longer work with Jobs. He said that Jobs was undermining him and making it impossible for him to run the company. The board had to make a choice: side with Sculley, the CEO, or side with Jobs, the founder. They chose Sculley in May 1985. Steve Jobs was forced out of Apple. Steve Jobs' experience at Apple was a tough one. He lost his job, his company, and his sense of self. He was only 30, and his career seemed to be over. He felt like Icarus, the boy from Greek mythology who flew too close to the sun and fell. But later, he said that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to him. It freed him to start fresh and explore new ideas. He realized that he had been too focused on control and not enough on collaboration. He also learned the importance of humility and empathy. But at the time, it was hard to see the silver lining. Jobs was jobless and uncertain about his future. He didn't know what he would do next. The end of an era had come, but a new chapter in his story was about to begin. He had to be strong and find a way to rise from the ashes. Starting over with Next and Pixar, he had been the heart and soul of Apple, but now he was on his own. He was sad and angry, but also ready for a new challenge. He decided to start a new company called Next. Next was different from Apple. Instead of making computers for everyone, Jobs wanted to make high-end computers for universities and researchers. He wanted to create machines that were powerful and beautiful with the best technology available. One thing that was very important to Jobs was design. He wanted the next computer to be perfect inside and out. He spent a lot of time choosing the right materials and making sure every detail was just right. The Next T computer was a black cube. It was simple and elegant. Jobs wanted it to be a work of art, not just a machine. The goal was to make a computer that was more powerful and easier to use than anything else on the market. This meant using new technologies and creating innovative software. Jobs also wanted to build a special factory for Next. It was a very modern factory with robots and automation. Jobs wanted to show that American companies could still make great products even though many others were struggling. So, Steve Jobs had this vision of creating a revolutionary computer. He knew it would be tough, but he was determined. He started with a small company, but it was hard to compete with giants like IBM and Apple. The first computer was expensive and didn't sell well because people didn't understand its value. Jobs had a clear idea, but convincing others was a challenge. The next computer was beautiful and powerful, but it was still too expensive. Jobs made the same mistake again. Despite the computer's flaws, the software it used was crucial. Next Step's operating system was advanced and easy to use, with features that later became part of Apple's Mac OS X. One of the best things about Next Step was that it was object-oriented, making it easier for programmers to write reusable and changeable code. This made it easier to create complex software. Next Step's operating system became a valuable asset for Apple when they later bought the company. Jobs learned a lot from this experience. He realized the importance of design and the importance of making products that people could afford. He also learned how to lead a team and how to work with other companies. He realized that he couldn't do everything himself and that he needed to rely on the skills and expertise of others. The next few years were tough for Jobs, but they were also important. He grew as a leader and learned valuable lessons that would help him later in his career. He was fired from his own company, but he wasn't defeated. He was ready to come back stronger than ever. The next chapter in his life would be even more amazing. Jobs and Lisa faced a difficult family situation. Despite this, they helped each other through it. This experience taught them valuable lessons about love, support, and resilience. Steve Jobs' life took a dramatic turn when he became a big company. He had money and fame, but his personal life was still a mess. One of the biggest issues was his relationship with Brennan. They had been friends since high school, but things weren't always easy. They had even lived together a few years before, but things didn't last. They stayed in each other's lives, sometimes close, sometimes not. They had a special connection, but they also had a lot of problems. In 1977, Brennan was pregnant, and the baby's father was Steve. This was a surprise for both of them. They weren't really together at the time, but Brennan decided to have the baby. Steve wasn't sure he wanted to be a father. He was busy with Apple and his career, and he also didn't know if the baby was his. This was a difficult time for Brennan after the baby was born. Steve didn't want to be very involved. He didn't want to think about it, and he even said that he wasn't the father, even though he knew he was. This made Brennan very angry. She felt like he was abandoning her and their child. The baby was a girl, and they named her Lisa. Steve didn't give her his last name. Brennan had to raise Lisa on her own. She didn't have much money, and she even had to go on welfare to get help. It was hard for her, but she loved Lisa very much. Years later, Steve would say that he wasn't proud of how he acted during this time. He said that he was young and didn't know how to be a father. He also said that he felt like Brennan wasn't telling him the truth about who else she was seeing. But whatever the reasons, Steve wasn't there for Lisa. The county of San Francisco, where they lived, decided to take Steve to court. They wanted him to pay child support money to help Brennan raise Lisa. Steve fought it at first. He didn't want to admit that Lisa was his daughter. He even said bad things about Brennan to try to make her look bad in court. But then something changed. Steve realized that he had made a mistake. He wanted to be a father to Lisa, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. Apple was about to go public, which meant they'd sell shares to regular folks. Steve knew that if he was in court fighting for his child, it could damage Apple's reputation. So, he agreed to a DNA test to see if he was Lisa's dad. The test showed he was almost certain. He had to admit it. The court ordered him to pay child support and return the welfare money Kristen had received. He also agreed to give Lisa his last name. Despite all this, Steve didn't spend much time with Lisa. He was too focused on his work. He seemed to struggle with being a father. San, who had been given up for adoption herself, said Steve was full of broken glass because of it. She said it made it hard for him to connect with others, even his own daughter. Lisa was a strong and smart girl, though. She did well in school and was good at writing. She also had a lot of anger and sadness because her father wasn't there for her. It was a tough start to her life. This whole situation showed a different side of Steve Jobs. He was a genius, but he was also a person with problems. He made mistakes and hurt people, but he also learned from them, even if it took him a long time. The story of Lisa and Kristen reminded us that even the most successful people have complicated lives and make choices they later regret. It also showed that even when things are tough, it's possible to find a way forward and build a better future. Steve's abandonment was a recurring theme in his life, as explored in Chapter 8 of his autobiography. The return to Apple. In the 1990s, things weren't going well for Apple. The company Steve Jobs had started was losing money. Other companies like Microsoft were becoming more popular. Many people thought Apple was going to disappear. It was a tough time for the company. Everyone who worked at Apple during that time knew that Gil Amelio was the CEO. He was trying to fix the problems, but it was tough. He knew Apple needed something new and big to change things. He thought about Steve Jobs, who wasn't working at Apple anymore. He had started his own company called Next and was also working at Pixar, making movies like Toy Story. Some people at Apple thought Steve Jobs could help. They knew he was smart, creative, and understood Apple better than anyone. But there was a problem. Steve Jobs and Gil Amelio didn't get along very well. They had met before, and it didn't go well. Emilio thought Jobs was too difficult to work with and was worried that Jobs would try to take over the company. Still, Apple needed help. Emilio decided to call Jobs and see if there was a way for them to work together. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew that Apple needed something special to survive in December 1996. Steve Jobs came back to Apple. He didn't become the CEO right away. He was just an advisor, but everyone knew he was really in charge. He started to make changes quickly. One of the first things he did was to look at all of Apple's products. There were too many. He thought Apple was making too many different kinds of computers, and it was confusing for people. Jobs decided to stop making some of them. He wanted to focus on the best products, the ones that were really important. This was a difficult decision, and it made some people at Apple angry, but Jobs knew it was the right thing to do. He also started to work on a new operating system. The operating system is the software that makes a computer work. Apple's operating system was old and not very good. Jobs wanted to make a new one that was better than anything else. He knew that Next had a good operating system, so he decided to use that. Apple bought Next, and Jobs brought his team from Next to work on the new operating system. It was a big change for Apple. Steve Jobs was making Apple smaller and more focused, but he was also bringing in new people and ideas. Some people were excited about the changes, thinking Jobs could save Apple, while others were worried they didn't like Jobs' personality and didn't want him to take over the company. One person who was particularly worried was Gil Amelio, who was still the CEO but knew Jobs was becoming more powerful. He was afraid Jobs would try to take his job. Amelio tried to work with Jobs, but Jobs was very demanding and had a strong vision for Apple. Amelio didn't always agree with him, and things were getting tense at Apple. There was a power struggle between Jobs and Amelio, and everyone was waiting to see what would happen. The future of Apple was uncertain. This was a difficult time for Apple, with the company struggling and there being a lot of conflict. But Steve Jobs was back, and he had a plan. He was determined to save Apple, even if it meant making some tough decisions. The next few months would be a turning point for Apple and for Steve Jobs himself. The iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad revolution. After fixing Apple's problems, Steve Jobs was ready to create new products. He wanted to make Apple more than just a computer company. He saw a future where computers, music players, phones, and tablets could all work together perfectly. This chapter is about how Steve Jobs and Apple changed the world again, one product at a time. The first big change was the iMac. Jobs knew that people needed a computer for their homes, but most computers were boring and difficult to use. He wanted to make something different. The iMac was a colorful all-in-one computer. This meant that the screen, keyboard, and computer were all in one piece. It was easy to set up and use, even if you didn't know a lot about computers. The iMac was a big success. It showed that Apple could still make great products that people loved. But Jobs didn't stop there. He wanted to do more. He started thinking about music. At the time, people were listening to music on CDs or downloading songs online. But there wasn't a good way to organize and listen to all your music on a computer. Jobs wanted to create a better way. That's why Apple made iTunes. iTunes was a program that made it easy to copy music from CDs to your computer, create playlists, and listen to your favorite songs. But Jobs didn't want people to just listen to music on their computers. He wanted them to be able to take their music with them. So, Apple created the iPod. The iPod was a small, portable music player that could hold thousands of songs. It was easy to use, had a long battery life, and looked beautiful. It was a big hit. People loved being able to carry all their favorite music in their pocket. The iPod changed the music industry before the iPod. Most people bought music on CDs, but the iPod made it easy to download songs online. Apple created the iTunes Music Store, where people could buy songs legally for 99 cents each. It was a simple and easy way to get music, and it helped to stop people from downloading music illegally. The iTunes Music Store became very popular, and Apple became a major player in the music industry. Jobs saw that the iPod and iTunes were changing the way people listened to music. He wanted to do the same for other areas of people's lives. He started thinking about phones. Most phones at the time were difficult to use and didn't do much more than make calls. Jobs wanted to create a phone that was easy to use, had a great screen, and could do many different things. The result was the iPhone. The iPhone was a smartphone that combined a phone, a music player, and an internet device. It had a big touch screen that was easy to use, and it could do many things like browse the web, send emails, and watch videos. The iPhone was a revolutionary product. It changed the way people used phones, and it also created a new industry, mobile apps. Steve Jobs revolutionized the tech industry with his innovative creations. He started the App Store, where people could download small programs for various tasks, from playing games to editing photos and reading books. The App Store's popularity boosted the iPhone's usefulness. But Jobs didn't stop there. He envisioned a tablet computer that could perform many of the same tasks as a computer. This led to the creation of the iPad, a tablet with a large touchscreen, long battery life, and access to thousands of apps. The iPad was a game changer, bridging the gap between computers and phones. It was perfect for reading, watching movies, browsing the web, and playing games. Apple's success with the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad transformed how people interacted with technology. These products not only changed the way we use devices, but also showcased Steve Jobs' visionary nature and his willingness to take risks. He didn't just create computers, music players, phones, and tablets. He created tools that empowered creativity and fostered connections among people. Steve Jobs' legacy continues to inspire generations, and his impact on the world is immeasurable. The secrets to Steve Jobs' success. Computers can listen to music and talk, but what made Steve Jobs so great at what he did? It wasn't just one thing. It was many things working together. First, Steve Jobs had a clear vision. He knew exactly what he wanted to create. He didn't just want to make a better computer. He wanted to make a computer that was beautiful, easy to use, and powerful. He wanted to make something that people loved, not just something they needed. This vision guided everything he did. He also had a strong focus. He knew what was important and what wasn't. He could say no to many good ideas so he could focus on the few that were truly great. This helped him avoid getting distracted and keep Apple on track. Jobs was a perfectionist. He cared about every detail, even the ones that most people wouldn't notice. He wanted everything to be just right, from the design of the product to the way it was packaged. This attention to detail made Apple products special and different in the little things. Jobs wanted perfection. Steve Jobs was also a great storyteller. He knew how to present his products in a way that made people excited. He could create a feeling of magic and wonder around even the simplest things. This made people want to buy Apple products, even if they were more expensive than other options. He could make people desire and want to buy his products. Another important thing was that Jobs combined art and technology. He knew that the best products were not just functional, but also beautiful. He brought together designers and engineers to create products that were both powerful and pleasing to the eye. Apple also had a great team. Jobs was good at finding talented people and inspiring them to do their best work. He created a culture where people were encouraged to be creative and innovative. It was a team made up of players, and he made sure to get rid of the rest. Finally, Steve Jobs was not afraid to be different. He challenged the status quo and did things his own way. He didn't care what other people thought. Legacy and final thoughts. Steve Jobs was a visionary leader who created something truly unique and special. His willingness to be different helped Apple stand out from the crowd. Jobs wasn't just a visionary or a perfectionist. He had a clear vision, a strong focus, and an amazing ability to present his ideas. He combined art and technology and built a great team. He wasn't afraid to be different, and all these things together made Steve Jobs the most successful business leader of his time. He made products that changed the world and built a company that will be remembered for generations. Steve Jobs died in 2011, but his story doesn't end there. He left behind a world that is very different because of him. He was more than just a businessman. He was a dreamer, an artist, and a leader who pushed people to do their best. Think about the phone in your pocket. It probably does many things that Steve Jobs imagined. He believed that technology could be beautiful and easy for everyone to use. He showed us that computers could be more than just tools. They could be works of art. He also showed us the importance of building a company that lasts. He wanted Apple to be more than just a way to make money. He wanted it to be a place where people were inspired to create amazing things for years to come. Steve Jobs wasn't perfect. He could be difficult, demanding, and even unkind. But he was also passionate, creative, and determined. He taught us that it's okay to be different, to think outside the box, and to challenge the rules. He proved that one person with a strong vision and a lot of hard work can truly change the world. His legacy lives on in the products we use every day and in the way we think about technology. He showed us that the best way to predict the future is to create it. Steve Jobs was a man who dared to dream and inspired us to do the same. Hey there, just a second before you go, if you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world to me. Key vocabulary. Here are some important words from the story of Steve Jobs. Learning these words will help you understand the story better and improve your English. 1. Adopted. When a child is taken and raised by parents who are not their biological parents. Example: Steve Jobs was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs when he was a baby. 2. Drop out of school/college. To leave school or college before finishing. Example: Steve Jobs dropped out of college after 6 months, but he kept learning in his own way. 3. Calligraphy. The art of beautiful handwriting. Example: Steve Jobs took a calligraphy class, which later helped him design beautiful fonts for Apple computers. 4. Entrepreneur. A person who starts and runs a business. Example: Steve Jobs was a successful entrepreneur who created Apple, Pixar, and Next. 5. Visionary. A person with strong ideas about the future. Example: Steve Jobs was a visionary who imagined technology that people didn't even know they needed. 6. Revolutionize. To completely change something in a new and important way. Example: the iPhone revolutionized the way people use mobile phones. 7. Fired. When someone loses their job. Example: Steve Jobs was fired from Apple, the company he started. 8. Comeback: a return to success after a difficult time. Example: Steve Jobs made a huge comeback when he returned to Apple and saved the company. 9. Innovation: a new idea, method, or invention. Example: the iPod was an innovation that changed how people listen to music. 10. Legacy: what someone leaves behind after they die, such as ideas or achievements. Example: Steve Jobs' legacy includes the iPhone, iPad, and Pixar movies. Now that you know these words, try to use them in sentences. Which word is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. Key grammar points. Now, let's look at some important grammar points from the story of Steve Jobs. These will help you understand English better and improve your speaking and writing skills. 1. Past simple versus past continuous. We use the past simple for completed actions in the past and the past continuous for longer or interrupted actions. Steve Jobs dropped out of college after 6 months. Past simple: a completed action. While he was studying at Reed College, he took a calligraphy class. Past continuous: background action, interrupted by past simple. Try it. Can you write a sentence about Steve Jobs using past simple and past continuous? 2. Used to. For past habits and states. We use used to talk about things that happened regularly in the past but don't happen now. Steve Jobs used to work in his parents' garage before Apple became a big company. He used to believe that design was as important as technology. Try it. What is something you used to do when you were younger? 3. First conditional. If plus present simple, will plus verb. We use the first conditional to talk about possible future situations. If you keep watching, you will learn more about Steve Jobs. If Apple had failed, technology would be very different today. Try it. Complete this sentence. If I work hard. 4. Passive voice. Be plus past participle. We use the passive voice when the focus is on the action, not who does it. Apple was founded by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976. The iPhone was invented in 2007. Try it. Rewrite this sentence in the passive voice. Steve Jobs created the iPod. 5. Direct and reported speech. We use direct speech to repeat the exact words someone said. We use reported speech to tell what someone said in a different way. Direct speech. Steve Jobs said, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." Reported speech. Steve Jobs said that we should stay hungry and foolish. Try it. Rewrite this sentence in reported speech. Steve Jobs said, "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." These grammar points will help you understand English better. Try using them in your own sentences. Let me know in the comments which one was most useful for you. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Steve Jobs, a man who never gave up, who thought differently, and who changed the world. What can we learn from his journey? That failure is not the end. That even if people don't believe in you, you must believe in yourself. That hard work, creativity, and passion can take you further than you ever imagined. Maybe you're learning English right now, and sometimes it feels difficult. But remember, learning a language is like building an iPhone. One step at a time, piece by piece, until one day, you realize you can do things you never thought possible. So stay hungry, stay foolish, and never stop learning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Learn English with Stories 365 for more inspiring stories and English lessons. And if you want to keep improving, join our Facebook group, Learn English with Stories 365, where you can practice with other learners, ask questions, and stay motivated. I'd love to hear from you. What inspired you most about Steve Jobs' story? Tell me in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.